Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most important and honestly one of the most controversial upgrades in Bitcoin's entire history, segregated witness, or as you probably know it, SegWit. It's a really fascinating story about a hidden flaw, a super clever fix, and a community that was, well, deeply divided over it. Let's get into it.
But, before we can really appreciate the solution, we have to understand the problem. And trust me, it was a big one. There was this fundamental vulnerability just kind of lurking in Bitcoin's code right from the start, and it seriously threatened to undermine the whole system. So what exactly was this hidden flaw?
All right, so here's the game plan. First up, we're going to uncover that hidden vulnerability I mentioned. Then, we'll get into what segregated witness actually is and how it pulls off its magic. After that, we'll look at the real-world impact it had, and we'll wrap things up by looking at the pros and cons that really split the community in two.
Okay, let's start with that ticking time bomb at the heart of early Bitcoin, and that is the problem of what's called transaction malleability. To really get why SegWit was so important, we first have to wrap our heads around this core weakness.
So, transaction malleability. It's a bit of a mouthful, right? But the idea behind it is actually pretty simple. Imagine you mail a package, and it has a tracking number. Malleability is like if someone could change that tracking number after you've sent the package, but before it gets delivered. The package still arrives, but your original tracking number now says the delivery failed. You can see how that would create a ton of confusion.
So here's how this could actually be used in an attack. A bad actor sees a valid transaction on the network before it gets confirmed. Now, they can't steal the money, but they can tweak the digital signature just a tiny bit. This little change doesn't void the payment, but, and this is the crucial part, it changes the transaction's unique ID. So the original sender might look at their wallet and think the payment failed, maybe they even send it again, all while the altered version quietly gets confirmed. There's a perfect recipe for chaos.
And this wasn't just some minor bug, It was a really fundamental weakness. Because these transaction IDs could be changed, you could never be 100% certain a payment went through correctly. This made it basically impossible to build cool new things like the Lightning Network, which needs to chain transactions together reliably. In a way, transaction malleability was holding Bitcoin's entire future hostage.
So, with the network's future hanging in the balance, a solution was desperately needed. And that's when segregated witness enters the scene. This really elegant, but yet deeply controversial, proposal to finally slay that malleability dragon.
The name pretty much says it all. Segregated witness, or SegWit, is just a protocol upgrade that does one simple thing. It separates or segregates the digital signature, which is also called the witness data, from all the other transaction info. That's it. That's the core idea.
But this seemingly simple idea did not have an easy ride. It was first proposed way back in 2015 by a developer named Peter Willey. What came next was 2 straight years of really intense, sometimes ugly debate. You had miners who were worried it would kill their profits from fees, and developers who saw it as absolutely essential for Bitcoin to grow. It all came to a head in August 2017, when it was finally activated as a soft fork, which is a clever, backward-compatible way to upgrade the network without, completely breaking it. At least, not yet.
Okay, so we know what it is, but how does just moving some data around fix such a massive problem? This is where we get into the nuts and bolts. Section 3, how SegWit actually works. This is the real aha moment.
So first, a quick refresher on what's inside a Bitcoin transaction. You've got the main transaction data, that's the who, what, and how much, and then you've got the witness data. That's the digital signature that proves you actually have the right to spend the Bitcoin you're sending. Think of it like the check itself, and then the signature on the check that makes it valid.
The solution was honestly surprisingly elegant. Before SegWit, the signature data, the part that could be changed, was bundled right inside the main transaction. This meant it was part of what created the transaction ID. The fix? Just move it. SegWit created a separate new structure just for this witness data, pulling it out of the main transaction block. By doing that, the core transaction ID could be calculated without it, which effectively locked it in place.
And there you have it. With that malleable signature data moved out of the equation, the transaction ID became immutable. A bad actor couldn't mess with the ID anymore without completely invalidating the entire payment. And just like that, the transaction malleability problem was solved. Pretty clever, right?
So fixing malleability was the main objective for sure, but SegWit also came with this really powerful side effect that honestly changed Bitcoin forever. Its real impact was in creating a much more capable network. the most immediate thing people noticed came down to this number. Before SegWit, a standard Bitcoin block could hold around 1,650 transactions. After SegWit, that jumped to nearly 2,700. I mean, that is a huge leap in capacity. And it was all because moving the signature data freed up a ton of valuable space inside each block.
So how did it do that? Well, SegWit introduced this new idea called block weight. It basically replaced the old rigid 1 megabyte block size limit with a more flexible 4 million weight unit limit. And since the witness data that got moved was counted differently, it was given less weight. You could suddenly fit more transactions into the same amount of space.
So the overall impact here was massive. More transactions per block meant higher throughput and, good for us, lower fees. The malleability fix obviously made everything more secure, but the real game changer was that it finally unlocked the door for things like the Lightning Network to be built safely right on top of Bitcoin. It was a foundation for the future.
But like I said at the start, this fix was anything but universally loved. It kicked off one of the biggest, ugliest fights in Bitcoin's history. So for our last section, let's look at the pros and cons through the eyes of that divided community.
You could see the battle lines drawn pretty clearly. On one side, proponents were pointing to the obvious wins: more scalability, cheaper fees, a critical security fix, and a network that was finally ready for the future. But the other side saw things very differently. They argued the whole thing was way too complex and a slow adoption would just fragment the network. And the big one, especially for miners, was that lower transaction fees for users meant less income for them.
And this wasn't just an argument online. This fierce debate over SegWit directly led to a major split in the network, a hard fork that created what we now know as Bitcoin Cash. Its supporters basically rejected SegWit's whole approach, arguing that the simpler, better way to scale was just to increase the block size directly. So, to wrap it all up, SegWit was, without a doubt, a brilliant technical fix. It surgically removed a dangerous bug, cleverly boosted the network's capacity, and really did pave the way for Bitcoin's future. But it also came at the cost of a fractured community, which just goes to show that in a decentralized world, the code is only half the battle.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought. The story of SegWit proves that even the most elegant technical solution can turn into a political firestorm. So the question I'll leave you with is this. If a critical bug fix can split a community this deeply, what does that really tell us about the future of trying to govern these decentralized systems? Something to think about.